The modern hiker walks into a brightly lit retail cathedral, surrounded by the neon hues of synthetic fibers and the sterile promise of industrial safety. They reach for a sleeping bag, their eyes tracing the bold white numerals stamped into the ripstop nylon, 0 degrees. In that moment, a dangerous psychological shift occurs. They believe they have purchased survival. They believe that for the price of a few $100s, they have acquired a personal indemnity against the cruelty of the winter night. But this is the great modern amnesia, the belief that a product can replace a process. We have forgotten that nature does not recognize the branding of a corporation, nor does it respect the optimistic ratings determined in a controlled laboratory. The paradox of our age is that the more advanced our gear becomes, the more fragile our connection to reality remains. We have outsourced our resilience to zippers and loft, forgetting the fundamental laws of thermodynamics that govern the lives of our ancestors for millennia. To understand the cold is to understand entropy. The second law of thermodynamics dictates a relentless universal truth. Heat will always migrate toward the absence of heat. It is a cosmic leveling, a search for equilibrium that cares nothing for your comfort. Your sleeping bag, despite its high-tech credentials, is not a heater. It is merely a boundary. It is a static, unthinking filter attempting to slow down the inevitable march of your biological energy into the infinite hunger of the night. If you place a stone inside a 0-degree thermos, that stone remains cold. If you place a starving, exhausted human body inside a 0-degree bag, the bag does not save them. It merely entombs them in their own declining temperature. Our ancestors understood what we have chosen to ignore, that survival is not a commodity you pack in a rucksack, but a metabolic system you maintain through constant, conscious interaction with your environment. We have replaced the wisdom of the woods with the convenience of the shelf, and in doing so, we have become the most vulnerable version of our species to ever walk the earth. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, or the desolate reaches of the Eastern Front, soldiers discovered with brutal clarity that the comfort promised by their equipment was a lethal illusion. They learned that when the wind strips the loft from your jacket and the moisture of your own breath turns your sanctuary into a cold compress, the only thing that remains is your understanding of the physics of heat. We must look past the marketing myths and re-examine the microclimate, the tiny, fragile envelope of air between your skin and the abyss. It is time to stop buying products and start reclaiming the ancestral engineering that allows a human being to thrive where the mercury fails. We are the furnace, the world is the thief, and tonight we learn how to lock the door. The modern survivalist surrounds themselves with the aesthetics of resilience. Silicone-coated nylon shimmering like a beetle's wing, waterproof zippers with tolerances measured in microns, and synthetic insulation engineered to mimic the down of an Arctic bird. We view these items as armor, yet in the theater of the deep freeze, they are often nothing more than brittle stage props. The failure of modern technology is rarely a matter of total destruction. It is a failure of logic. We have built tools that thrive in the laboratory, but wither under the chaotic variables of the wild. To understand why your high-tech sleeping bag will eventually betray you is to understand the fragile relationship between material science and the relentless pull of entropy. Consider the concept of loft, the primary mechanism of modern warmth. This is the art of trapping dead air within a matrix of polyester or down. In the vacuum of a testing facility, the R value, the measure of thermal resistance, remains constant. But the moment you enter the bag, you introduce the variables of gravity and biology. According to Fourier's law of heat conduction, the rate of heat transfer is inversely proportional to the thickness of the insulation. When you roll onto your side in a midnight stupor, your body weight compresses those precious inches of loft into a thin, dense membrane. In an instant, the thermal resistance collapses. You have created a thermal short circuit where your internal heat is no longer trapped, but is instead invited to flee into the ground through a compressed medium that has lost its ability to resist the flow. Furthermore, our modern obsession with waterproof and breathable membranes often ignores the terrifying reality of phase changes. As you sleep, your body perpetually releases water vapor, insensible perspiration. In a synthetic environment, this vapor migrates toward the cold outer shell of your gear. If the temperature gradient is steep enough, the vapor reaches its dew point within the very fibers of your insulation. Here, the physics of latent heat becomes your enemy. The vapor condenses into liquid, and in extreme cold, it transitions into ice. This is the collapse of the system. Once the fibers are saturated or frozen, they no longer trap air, they become a conductive bridge. The very gear designed to keep you dry becomes a cold, damp shroud, holding the moisture against you in a suffocating embrace of ice. We have traded the robust, heavy reliability of natural materials for the lightweight convenience of the polymer. But polymers are children of the factory. They possess no inherent memory of survival. They do not react with moisture with the exothermic grace of animal fibers, nor do they maintain their structure under the weight of a desperate man. We are left with a paradox. The more specialized our tools become, the narrower the window of their effectiveness. We have built a world of fragile convenience, forgetting that in the cold, the only thing that does not break is the law of physics. Before we look to the sky or the wind, we must look down. To our ancestors, the earth was both a mother and a grave, but in the frozen theater of survival, she becomes a relentless thief. This is the most foundational layer of the survival system, the one upon which all other layers depend, and the one most frequently ignored by the modern mind, the principle of conduction. We often obsess over the air temperature, checking our watches and apps as if the atmosphere were our primary adversary. But the air is a poor thief. It is thin and easily discouraged. The ground, however, is a vampire. It possesses a near infinite thermal capacity, behaving not like a solid surface, but like a cold, dark ocean that never fills. In the language of physics, we are dealing with the cold reality of thermal conductivity. Your body is a reservoir of kinetic energy, a vibrating mass of molecules operating at roughly 310 Kelvin. The frozen Earth is a heat sink of such vast proportions that you could never hope to raise its temperature by even a fraction of a degree. When you lie down, you create a thermal bridge, a direct pathway for your life force to drain away. According to the laws of conduction, the rate of heat transfer is determined by the surface area of contact and the temperature differential. Because the Earth is so much denser than air, it strips heat from your body with a terrifying efficiency that no amount of topside insulation can counteract. It does not matter if your sleeping bag is rated for 50 below zero if the only thing between you and the permafrost is a few millimeters of compressed nylon. The soldiers on the Eastern Front, caught in the meat grinder of the 1941 winter, learned this through the most Darwinian of lessons. They watched as comrades who simply lay down in their greatcoats never woke up, their bodies literally emptied of energy by the soil. To survive, they had to break the bridge. They became architects of debris, building platforms of pine boughs, straw, or even empty ammunition crates. They understood that 4 inches of air-trapping organic material beneath the body was worth more than a foot of wool on top of it. This wisdom was mirrored across the globe by the Nenets of the Siberian tundra, who for centuries have utilized raised platforms and thick layers of reindeer hide, not for comfort, but to ensure that the cold hunger of the earth remains unsatisfied. They knew that to touch the earth in winter is to invite the equilibrium of the grave. You cannot warm the ground, you can only feed it until you have nothing left to give. Separation is the only salvation. Once the thermal bridge to the earth is severed, the focus shifts to the immediate envelope surrounding the skin, the microclimate. Here, the modern adventurer often falls into the trap of the plastic coffin. We choose synthetic fibers because they are light and easily compressed, but in doing so, we ignore the sophisticated molecular engineering found in the ancient loom. The soldiers of the mid-century did not have the luxury of ripstop polyester. They had wool, a material perfected by nature over millions of years of evolutionary R&D. While the modern world views wool as scratchy and obsolete, the physics of the fiber tells a story of profound resilience. Wool is not merely a passive insulator, it is an active thermal engine. At a microscopic level, wool fibers are coated in lanolin, a natural wax that provides a hydrophobic shield. But the true wisdom lies in its heat of sorption. When wool absorbs moisture, even the moisture from your own breath or sweat, a chemical reaction occurs. As water molecules are absorbed into the porous interior of the fiber, they lose their kinetic energy, which is then released as heat. This exothermic reaction means that wool actually generates warmth as it gets damp, a feat of ancestral engineering that no laboratory-born polymer has ever truly replicated. It can hold up to 30% of its weight in water and still maintain the structural integrity of its air pockets. It is a material that refuses to surrender to the damp, cold entropy that renders modern gear useless. Beyond the material, there is the hidden geometry of the body itself. The modern mummy bag is often designed for a generic human form, leaving vast pockets of dead air around the feet, the knees, and the shoulders. To a physicist, this is a catastrophe of inefficiency. Every cubic centimeter of air within your shelter must be heated by your own metabolic furnace. If you are heating a volume of air that does not touch your skin, you are wasting the very calories that keep you alive. The soldiers in the frost-locked forests of the past understood this volume-to-surface area ratio instinctively. They did not lie flat as if on a mattress at home. They curled into the fetal position, drawing their knees to their chests and wrapping their heavy wool greatcoats tight around the core. By reducing their surface area and eliminating dead air, they shrank their microclimate to the smallest possible volume. They weren't trying to heat a bag, they were heating the 2 millimeters of air directly against their jugular and their femoral arteries. This is the technique that renders the tool secondary. It is the realization that survival is a game of millimeters and molecular friction, where the shape of your body is just as important as the fabric that covers it. History serves as a cold, unforgiving laboratory where the price of a failed experiment is often an ossified silence. The annals of conflict and exploration are written in the frozen remains of those who mistook a product for a process. In the winter of 1941, as the German Wehrmacht stalled in the waist-deep snows outside Moscow, the reality of applied history became a visceral struggle for biological preservation. The soldiers who survived the meat grinder of the Eastern Front were not necessarily those best equipped by the industrial might of Berlin. They were the ones who surrendered their pride and adopted the Siberian reality of their adversaries. They observed the local peasantry, men and women who had lived in a perpetual, shivering truce with the frost for centuries. These locals did not trust in the singular promise of a heavy coat. They trusted in the nested hierarchy of materials. They wore valanki, heavy felt boots of dense, non-woven wool, and utilized the telegreka, a quilted cotton jacket that functioned as a series of dead-air baffles. They understood that the secret to enduring a Russian winter was not in resisting the cold, but in creating a nested series of thermal barriers that the wind could not penetrate and the ground could not drain. Consider the Swedish Karelins during the disastrous retreat of 1719 across the Eifelt Mountains. Thousands perished in a single night as a blizzard tore through their ranks. Yet the small clusters of men who survived were those who abandoned the rigid military posture of the era. They didn't huddle in the open, clinging to the false hope of their uniforms. They dug into the snow itself. To the uninitiated, snow is a bringer of death. To the practitioner of ancestral wisdom, snow is a sophisticated insulator with a thermal conductivity significantly lower than that of the frozen earth beneath it. By carving out a hollow and utilizing the specific heat capacity of the snow and their own bodies, they created a stable microclimate that hovered near the freezing point, even as the air outside screamed at -40. They turned the very element of their destruction into a sanctuary of thermal inertia. We see this same mastery in the Arctic explorers of the heroic age, specifically Fridtjof Nansen during his traverse of the Greenland ice cap. Nansen did not rely on the heavy, cumbersome canvas tents favored by the British Navy of the time. Instead, he looked to the Sami and the Inuit, adopting the reindeer skin sleeping bag. Reindeer hair is a masterpiece of natural material science. Each strand is hollow, filled with air, providing a level of insulation that remains uncompressed even under the weight of a sleeping man. Nansen understood that survival was not a matter of fighting the environment, but of integrating into its physical laws. These historical figures were not merely tough, they were unintentional physicists. They succeeded because they viewed their equipment as a modular extension of their own metabolism, a symphony of layers that managed the flow of energy with the precision of a watchmaker. They knew that in the deep freeze, the only thing that lasts is the wisdom to know which laws of nature to exploit. The ultimate failure of the modern survivalist lies in the belief that warmth is something you wear, rather than something you generate. We have become a culture of consumers who believe that safety is found in the high-tech weave of a textile, forgetting that the most sophisticated piece of thermal engineering is the one currently reading these words. You are not a passive resident of a sleeping bag. You are the active heat source that makes the bag relevant. To master the technique over the tool is to recognize that your body is a walking, breathing combustion engine, and like any engine, it requires fuel to maintain its RPM against the slowing pull of the frost. In the cold, your metabolism is your primary defense. This is the biological hack that the history books won't teach, but the soldiers on the front lines lived by. You eat to sleep. According to the principle of diet-induced thermogenesis, the act of digestion itself generates a significant amount of heat. However, not all fuels are created equal in the eyes of physics. If you consume simple sugars or carbohydrates before bed, you are merely throwing flash paper onto the fire. You will experience a brief, intense spike in temperature, followed by a metabolic crash in the darkest hours of the night, usually around 3 a.m., when the environment is at its most predatory. The veteran survivors of the 20th century knew better. They prioritized fats and proteins, hard cheese, lard, or smoked meats. These complex molecules take hours to break down, turning your stomach into a slow-burning radiator that provides a steady, rhythmic output of thermal energy while you are unconscious. You do not save your rations for the morning. You consume them as a tactical necessity to ensure there is a morning. The final refinement of the technique is the management of your own exhaust. We often treat our sleeping systems like hermetically sealed vaults, but a system that cannot breathe is a system that will inevitably freeze. The modern obsession with waterproof synthetic shells creates a trap of our own making. As you sleep, you exhale nearly half a liter of moisture. In a plastic-lined bag, this vapor hits the cold outer wall and immediately undergoes a phase change, condensing into liquid and eventually freezing into a layer of rime ice. By morning, you are sleeping in a cold, damp compress that has stripped the insulation of its power. The ancestors used canvas and wool because they are semi-permeable. They allow the high-pressure water vapor of your breath to escape into the lower-pressure outside air while maintaining the wind-proof integrity of the shell. It is a delicate, thermodynamic balance. You must block the convection of the wind, but you must allow the latent heat of vaporization to carry the moisture away. To master this is to move beyond the product and into the process. You are no longer relying on a label. You are orchestrating a complex exchange of energy, moisture, and matter. You are not buying survival. You are performing it. The tragedy of the modern condition is that we have mistaken the accumulation of objects for the acquisition of safety. We live in an era of unprecedented thermal luxury, where the flick of a thermostat or the swipe of a credit card provides an immediate artificial reprieve from the demands of the natural world. But this luxury is a thin veneer, a brittle shell that masks a profound biological poverty. We have become a society of specialists who know how to operate the machine, but have forgotten the physics that make the machine necessary. In our rush to embrace the convenience of the black box product, we have severed our connection to the resilient legacy of our ancestors. The men and women who didn't just survive the winter, but who understood it as a teacher of endurance. Reclaiming this wisdom is not merely a hobby for the enthusiast, it is an act of essential realignment with the universe. The laws of thermodynamics, the cold, unyielding mechanics of conduction, convection, and radiation, do not care about our technological progress. They are as immutable today as they were when the first fires were struck in the caves of the Paleolithic. When the power grid fails, when the supply chain fractures, or when the zipper on your $300 bag jams in a midnight blizzard, the neon promises of the marketplace vanish. In that silence, you are left with only two things: the heat your body can generate and the knowledge you have stored in your mind. We must move beyond the consumer mind, which asks what to buy, and return to the ancestral mind, which asks how to be. Survival is not a commodity to be hoarded, it is a system to be practiced. It is the understanding that a pile of dry leaves is a more reliable ally than a wet down jacket, and that a piece of hard fat is a better sleeping pill than a chemical sedative. This is the true meaning of resilience, the ability to maintain the internal fire regardless of the external entropy. The soldiers of 1944 who navigated the frozen dark did not bring home better gear. They brought home a visceral realization that the human spirit, when guided by the laws of physics, is the most sophisticated survival tool ever devised. The next time you stand in that retail cathedral, looking at the ratings and the logos, remember that you are looking at a shadow. The real substance is within you. The sleeping bag is a product, but the sleep system is a skill. The world will continue to sell us comfort, promising that safety is just one more purchase away. But history whispers a different truth. History teaches us that tools will break and materials will fail. But the wisdom of the microclimate, the breaking of the thermal bridge, and the mastery of the metabolic furnace are legacies that can never be lost. Protect the heat you already have. Build your system. Reclaim your resilience.